Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Peya Pedig Hey, Halacha Gimel and Halacha Dalid. We're going to be learning Daf Memvav. We left off on Daf Memvav Amud Aleph, right by Halacha Gimel, by the Mishnah, 5 lines from the top of the Amid. Halacha Gimel will discuss certain potential or real restrictions on the landowner, even after the harvest, right? Prior to the poor's collection of the leket is laying on the field. I know that someone, I think it was Ido, he hopped on this already last week. You know, the balabas is not allowed to give it out to the aniyim. It's left for the local aniyim, as we spoke out so much, to get it open competition. Yeah, are there any restrictions on the landowner to do anything in the field simply because leket is laying there? Or are there no restrictions on the landowner? He will have the permit to do what he needs, and even if that would mean that he's going to ruin the leket, he'll have to compensate for the leket, but he doesn't have any restrictions. That's going to be the first topic. The Mishnah is going to simplify it. The Gemara is going to bring a braisa to Sefta that will extensively expound on all of the nuance of are there restrictions or are there no restrictions. That will be the topic of Halacha Gimel. And Halacha Dalid, the Mishnah we're going to have on Daf Memvav Amud Beis, is going to speak about something which is similar but not the same. And that is the following. I know the world is different nowadays, but think about it. Then you can have a person who's halachically not an ani, but who's traveling and who runs out of money and runs out of food. I know this phenomena barely exists today. You have your bank card. There were no bank cards. So there's no doubt that during that time, that person is allowed to collect leket. Even though at home, the guy has $1 billion. Currently, he doesn't have access to his funds. He doesn't have access to food. He takes leket. Question is, how do we view that? Do we view that during that time he was a poor person? So even when he comes back home, he doesn't have to compensate the aniyim, or he was allowed to take it. Listen to this, but it's like a loan. And when he comes back home, he'll be chayiv to compensate the aniyim. Then we'll see to which aniyim. But it's amazing. Just that in itself is going to be a topic in the Mishnah. Another topic we're going to have in the Mishnah on Amud Beis will be what happens if an ani will exchange his leket with regular tevel produce. Where does the exemption of maizus go to? Does it remain on the leket? Or since the ani exchanged it with a balabas, does that exemption go to the balabas? And just to speak out right now, even though the limudim won't be negayam for the sugya that we'll have at the end of today's daf, but in Chulin, and we already spoke it out, I'm just going to quote the source, the din will learn today, that an ani is usher to take from his own produce the portions that are designated for the poor. In other words, if the landowner is halachically an ani from his own field, he's not allowed to collect, not the leket, not the shikha, not the peya. Similarly, produce that grew from the person's field, even if he's an ani, he may not take its meiser ani. Now that is learned out from a pasuk that we have in Emor, where the Torah is speaking there about peya. The Torah says, we keep on quoting this pasuk. And then leket, the leket ketzircha loiselakit. Really, there's a comma. So Chazal have a limud that when it says v'leket ketzircha loiselakit, la'ani, read these words together, which means that even you who are poor, you're not allowed to gather your own peya, your own leket. Through Hekesh, we include Shikha. Through Agzeda Shava, we include Meiser Ani. Bottom line will be, and that we'll need for the end of today's daf, is Nachamal, is that a person who's halachically an Ani may not gather from his own field, not the Leket, not the Shikha, not the Peya, nor may he be the recipient of the Meiser Ani of his own produce. How that's going to play out when you have an Aris, when you have two Arisim, as we'll see when we learn the Sugya inside. Chevra Daf Memvav, Amud Aleph, Halachi Gimel, right? 5 lines from the top of the Amud in the beginning of the line. There is one agricultural step that many times is necessary just to speak out prior to learning the Mishnah, and that is that immediately after the harvest, many times the field is dry, and in order for the owner to be more successful when he will plant for the next harvest, he's not planting now, months away, after you make the harvest, after the chutzir, you're going to either be megalgel b'toifeyach your field. That means that you will irrigate your field to the point where it's dripping wet. You're going to put a lot of water on your field. Or, that's the case of the Mishnah, or as we'll have a case in the Gemara, something which is substantially more than just irrigating your field to the point where it's dripping wet. A little bit of water gets absorbed. It's something called merabit sadeu. Merabit sadeu was drenching your field. That was a step that farmers would do, not always, but whenever they understood that their land is dry, they're going to water it a little bit or a lot, and that's going to be very beneficial for the balabas when he's going to plant the grain for the next season. And now comes the challenge of the Mishnah and of the subsequent Gemara Brais, which is that we explained what leket is. Leket is something that you left on the field. Shikha is something that you left on the field. You, balabas, you're not allowed to distribute it. You are maniach for aniyim to come pick it up. We already learned not that long ago, the 3 times in the day, minimum, the maximum, where the balabas was there and the aniyim picked it up. Prior to those moments, there is stuff that does not belong to the owner. It belongs to the aniyim on the field. What happens if the balabas knows as a farmer, now is the opportune moment either to irrigate my field until it's dripping wet, or to mamish drench my field. Now is the time to do it. Now, if you're going to do it, you're going to ruin the leket and the shikha and the payam. Right? We're talking about leket. We'll just mention one of the 3. You're going to ruin it. If you're not going to do it, you will have a damage. It's either you're going to be a mazik or you're going to become the nizak. What are you supposed to do? Now, there are 2 parts to this question. The first part to this question is, could you b'chlal do anything? But let's say you could. Make one thing clear. It doesn't mean that you don't have to compensate. You have to compensate. And by the way, compensation is shayach on both sides. You can have compensation where the balabas feels that since he did not irrigate his field, he's going to lose $50 worth. I'm just going to make a number. Let's say this leket shikhampeya $100 worth. The balabas can compensate himself by taking from the leket the $50 that he lost. Same thing the other way around. Let's say we're going to say, no, the balabas has the right to irrigate his field. It's going to ruin the leket. Say that. How much leket was ruined? The worth of $50. Let the balabas give of his own produce another $50 worth. In other words, we're not speaking about doing a hezek and not paying for it. That's not the topic. You will pay for it. But are you allowed to do it? Can I be mazik your mammon and then pay you for it? Guys, that's a gavaldik sugya, which is way beyond the topic of like a chikhan pay.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Have we mentioned the idea about what happens if no one comes to pick up your leket? Like, I'm a field owner and whatever, they don't want my stuff. There's no aniyim, or the guy next to me has much more stuff. So like,
very good. I'm very happy you're bringing this up because from our sugya, from a braisa, we're going to have a little bit into this. We're going to see, according to one Tana, at some point, you're going to take the produce of the aniyim and you're going to put it over the fence. So at least it's not in your way. Mamish, in other words, Danny, I'm not answering your question, but we're touching on this. There are times, especially then they didn't have running water, that there is an opportunity right now for me to drench my field or to irrigate my field with water right now. I don't have time right now to pick up the leket, the shikhan, the payam. I'm going to lose that water opportunity. So that's the topic that we're talking about. I want to add just one more word in our Hagdama. I know this is a whole sugya that the Briskers love speaking about, which is really awesome. This is a big chiddush of Rab Chaim. And that is that one of the differences between Geneva and Gezela, aside of Kiyadua, right, the Gemara, Befedish and Bava Kama, right, that the Gazlan doesn't have a fear of anyone, right? That's why there's no kafel there. He steals in front of you. The Ganev hat moida from Bnei Adam, even though he doesn't have fear of God. So on one level, the Ganev is even much worse, and he gets the penalty of kefil, and sometimes Dalal behave. But there's another whole difference between Gezela and Geneva. What's the Machayev of Geneva? The Maisa HaGeneva. The Maisa HaGeneva. What's the Machayev of Gezela? The Hefsed Mammon. Why am I mentioning this? Because our Mishnah is not going to allow anyone not to compensate their fellow. Our Mishnah is not speaking about any scenario where there will be an actual Hefsed Mammon. There won't be a Hefsed Mammon. Because whichever party will accommodate the other, which means whether the owner is going to irrigate his field or whether the owner will not irrigate his field, there will be compensation. No one is losing. Nevertheless, it's a question whether you are allowed to do it. I'm not allowed to ruin your property, even if I plan to compensate. And now let's read the Mishnah inside.
How do we treat this if it just rains a lot?
Rain is not something that I did, Keva. So his bad mazak. Very good. That's God. That's between him and God. Here, I want to do something. I'm the owner. Let's say in the case where I'm the owner. So the word megalgal, galgal means a wheel. One of the common ways that they would draw water from one place to the other is that they would have these huge water mills. So there would be a wheel that would move the water. So that's just a irrigation. The word toifeyach we already know, because there's a very little irrigation, where the item here, the field, is not even dripping wet. The water gets absorbed. Toifeyach means irrigating it more than just that. You're irrigating it to the point where it's dripping wet. Now, like again, just remember, there is something even more than that the Braisa will speak about, and that will be a difference at the end of the sugya. The Mishnah is speaking about megalgal b'toifeyach. So says the Mishnah, megalgal and b'toifeyach. You're not allowed to do that. Divrei Rav Meir. In other words, the owner is going to suffer a loss because he's not allowed to be mafsid the moment of the ani. Even though the owner would want to compensate him, he's not allowed to do it. But as the Marafulda says at the end of the Mishnah, L'shitas Rabbi Meir, it's not like Rav Meir is telling the Balabas, you're not allowed to irrigate the field and go suffer the loss. No. The Balabas knows how much his field would have given had he watered it. And his not watering it will diminish the produce of next season. My $50. The Balabas will take those $50 from the leket. However, the Chachamim matirin. The Chachamim allow the owner to be megalgal b'toifeyach, irrigate your field. And yes, that will ruin the leket. But the Balabas says, it's my field. It's my field. And I want to just say to what Danny says, it has nothing to do whether, here in the Gemara, whether the Ani had an opportunity to pick it up, whether the Ani did not have an opportunity. The Mishnah doesn't mention that, which would be something that one can argue. Well, it depends if the Anis had opportunities and they didn't, but ad masai, the Balabas has to suffer. The Mishnah is very vague. You know, the Mishnah just introduces, someone will lose. No one is going to lose compensation. That's key. No one is losing compensation. The question is, who is going to be the loser? Rav Meir holds the Ani may not lose. I cannot be mafsid mammon of the Ani. I cannot be mazik. He won't be mafsid because I'm going to pay. No. The Chachamim hold punkt fakert. The Balabas doesn't have to lose anything. It's his field. But to make it clear, the Balabas has to compensate the poor. Okay. Clear. So, right, Chachamim, Rav Meir. Now we're going to learn a Braisa. Says the Gemara. Now the Braisa, Tanei, Hamerabeit Sodei. Generally, it's the same thing, but it's not the same thing as we'll see at the end of the Sugya. Merabeitz, the word Merabeitz is something that we find so often. There used to be Merabeitz, even people's homes, before they had the proper flooring, when they had just earth flooring, so there was a dust issue. So many people would throw water or wine, remember, to bring the dust down. The word Ributz was used there. However, in our Braisa now, Hamarabet Sodeu actually means to drench. You will see, the drenching of the field is mazik a lot more. When a field is so dry that it needs drenching, not drenching will cause much greater damage. This, what I'm saying now, will be important, not for now, but for later. So the words of the Braisa is Hamarab et Sodeyu. Actually, Yarad Oni L'Teicham. The Braisa is saying this, that he did it, but the Braisa really means whether he's allowed to do it. So listen to this. The Chachamim of the Braisa, the Tanakam of the Braisa, already goes into more detail. He says like this: Im hezekoi merubai al shel ani. If the potential loss, right, is greater than the potential loss of him not drenching the field, is greater than the loss that he will cause by drenching it and ruining it to the ani. No, who's losing more money? It's mamish objective. It's not who has to bear the loss. The ani, not the loss. No one is losing money, but who's allowed to be the mazik and who has to become the nizak? That's the question. It depends who has a greater hezek. So if the owner, by not drenching, will lose more than the ani will lose by yes drenching, mutter, yes drench, and again, guys, pay the ani. Pay the ani. I know the Braisa doesn't say these words, but that's the way we're learning it, and it changes everything. It puts the focus where it should be, not where it should not be. It's not about hefset mammon, it's about the maisa of being mazik. However, in other words, if he will postpone the drenching, yeah, he'll lose something. But if he will drench, the ani will lose more than asur. Then he's not allowed to do it. Our Mishnah made no such distinction. I want to add another layer over here. Don't forget just to appreciate that there isn't a specific ani who you are being mazik. No one picked it up yet. Not only did no one pick it up yet, you, the owner, cannot even designate which ani should pick it up. But we did learn that the local aniyim all have equal opportunity, called the alam gvar, open competition. So we viewed the local aniyim as the owners. Okay, that is the chachamim. Now, our Mishnah made no such distinction. We'll get back to that. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda ben kach u ben kach. The owner is never allowed to be mazik, the leket. And again, the shikhan, the peya, whatever, the matnas aniyim on the field, never. What must he do? Here we go, Danny. Manichan al hagader. Prior to drenching, he must gather. The balabas does have some right. Now, this right the Mishnah never spoke about, but it takes time. Now, I don't know when is he allowed to do it. That's what really Danny was asking. I don't know when he's allowed to do it. Is it because, like we learned in the Mishnah before, there are 3 times a day, a full day passed? Maybe even if the 3 times didn't pass, but still, his field is parched dry. Now is the only opportunity to drench it. I don't know. But the Nakuda, at least what I do know, is that Rabbi Yehuda is saying he may never drench the field prior for the balabas to clear out the field in a way where the aniyim don't lose anything. And that will be manicham al agade. First, he has to put it over a fence. And only the end, the ha'ani bava noita. Now, once he has it on the fence, now he can irrigate his field. Now he can drench his field. Prior
what happens
to which
to open competition? If you put it in one location, it's no longer spread around.
That's life. That detail we're not going into. By the way, leket might not be spread around. You don't know where leket is going to be. Could be I only have leket in one little corner. Peya only has to be in one little corner. But in other words, Rabbi Yehuda is saying that even if the loss of the balabas by not drenching is huge, the loss of the ani is little. There's only a couple of years of leket. There's very little leket. We don't make that cheshbon. There's shalaniyim. You cannot be mazik the property of aniyim. Okay, Nikud. Frek the Gemara. I got a problem. Let's begin with Rabbi Yehuda. We just read Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. The owner may never ruin the property of the ani. Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is not consistent. I have a stira b'shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Come on, over here in the Oisva Hadar's pagination, we're referring to a Mishnah that we will have soon in the Sechus Pei and Daf Samach Beis here in the Yerushalmi. Come on, now let me tell you what the Mishnah there is referring to. Something similar, not the same. We have grapevines that were too densely concentrated when they were planted, and as they are growing, because of their close proximity, the product is not that good. There isn't enough earth to give nourishment for such a dense packed vine, grapevines. And therefore, after the owner harvests his fields, same thing for the next season. Like here, watering is for the next season. The owner knows that it's good for him to be maydale. We had the word maydale. Maydale means here to thin out, to remove some vines. If you remove some vines, it's going to end up benefiting the owner. Problem is that one of the matnas aniyim that we didn't learn yet a lot about, but we already mentioned the word, is called oileilois. Oileilois are underdeveloped clusters that the owner has to leave on the vines. And here again, for him to be maydale the vines, to take some off, if the aniyim did not yet pick up those oileilois, they're going to get ruined. I know that they're not that great to begin with, but they're something. So the same thing. Now was his opportunity to do maydale it. Can the owner be maydale the vines, which is beneficial for the owner, even though it's going to be detrimental to the ani? Or the other side is, as long as the aniyim did not pick up their oileilois, they're the boss. You're not allowed to be mazik that which does not belong to you. Very similar to here. And what did we learn over there? That Rabbi Yehuda, now we're quoting Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, that Keshem Shuhu Meidel B'Shaloi, Kachu Meidel B'Shalaniyim. Don't forget, the owner also loses when he takes off vines, if you want to look at it that way. It's good to have more vines. It's not more vines is better than less vines. Nevertheless, the owner, why will he be Meidel? Because he's the boss. And he knows that in the bigger picture, if he's going to thin it out right now, it's going to be beneficial for him later. So just like he's taking off his own vines, he cannot be, it's not fair to restrict him because the ani has his oileilos on it. In other words, who does the Rabbi Yehuda look after most? He looks after the owner. And let's go with the way we're learning from the Marafulda and the others. Compensation is not, we're not even talking about compensation. He'll give the compensation. That's a contradiction. And does Rabbi Yehuda what he's saying? That the owner may never drench his field. Oh, so here we go. Well, Danny, it's for you this. So now answers the Gemara. I'll tell you the difference. Come on over there in Daf Samach Beis. In the case of the oileilois, hein garmula atzman. That's the key. Okay, here we go. Now it is in the Gemara. The aniyim, the aniyim had an opportunity to pick up their oileilois, and they did not. In other words, the time where someone will be maydale their grapevines is not immediately after the harvest. Again, I don't know exactly how to define that, but poyel mamish, they immediately. So here there's a logic to say you had your opportunity already. It's not fair on the balabas. You were lazy. You did not do what was left for you. So the balabas now cannot do anything on his field. You're a squatter. Get out. But now over here, the drenching of the land must be done immediately after the harvest. That's just the nature of farming. In other words, the fact that the aniyim did not pick it up, it's not on the aniyim. Hareibo means that they would come if you would let them come. You want to drench it before they even had the first opportunity to come. That's why Rabbi Yehuda will protect the property of the aniyim, even though it will be detrimental to the balabas. Beautiful. So here we do have this concept. But we're not done yet. Now says the Gemara, you want to reconcile the Chachamim, right? Samach Beis, and I'm sorry, Rabbi Yehuda of Samach Beis, and Rabbi Yehuda here in the Braisa, on Peya Memvav, Vaiter, Mechalfa Shitasi de Rabbanon. Now let's go back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah had Chachamim and Avmei. The Chachamim said, Matirin. The Chachamim in our Mishnah hold that the owner, will have to compensate the aniyim, but the owner does what the owner needs to do to make sure that his field does not become ruined, for him not to have a lesser amount of produce. So over here, Taman, Inun Amrin, over there in the first brisa that we quoted, right, Tani Hamarabit Sadeyu, the Chachamim differentiated. They said that Im Ezekim and Yerushalmi, then is one thing. Right? Who's going to lose more? Whoever's going to lose more has the right. It's really always the balabas. Who does he have to look after? If he's going to lose more, he looks after himself. If the ani is going to lose more, he looks after the ani. And but in the Mishnah didn't make such a difference. The Mishnah is saying the Chachamim hold that the owner always has the right to irrigate the field. Yes, you have to compensate, but he never has to be concerned with not being mazik the anis. How do you resolve that? Turning to Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis. Answers the Gemara, and here again, like we have so often in Yerushalmi, there's so many different girsa'os, and it makes such a huge difference. So we're going to follow this following girsa. Come on, meaning in the Braisa by Merabetz. Let's use the words e efshar. The e efshar is going to mean that, like we mentioned, when a field needs drenching, the lack of drenching it will cause a huge loss for the balabas. And by the way, and yes, drenching it will cause a huge loss for the ani. The case of the Braise is that someone is going to hugely lose money. There's going to be, now, I don't know how to define the huge. What's huge? What's little? I don't know. But the concept, whenever there's a huge loss, that is where the Chachamim say, well, we have to start measuring who's going to lose more. Our Mishnah is not speaking about merabetz, but megalgal. And as we said in the beginning, megalgal means, yeah, you're irrigating it with water that's going to make it dripping wet, but you're not drenching it. Which means both sides, that when you put the water on the field, yes, you'll be mazik some of the leket, but not all of the leket. And you can actually measure how much damage. It's a lesser amount of damage. If the owner will not be megalgal, yes, it's not going to be as good for the next harvest, but it's nish geferlich. It's something that's not so terrible. How do you put that in monies and dollars and cents? I don't know, but the idea is gavaldik. And that will be the difference. Whenever there's going to be a huge damage, the Chachamim demand to measure who's going to lose more. Who has to compensate whom? Whenever there isn't such a huge damage, the Chachamim, unlike Rav Meir, hold that it's his field. It's his field. And even though, as we just said, the Aniyim did not even have the opportunity yet to pick up any of their leket, so what? He's going to compensate them. He's going to compensate them, but he has the right to freedom of doing whatever he needs to do on his field.
Now, wait, the Aniyim get how many chances to come and collect? 3 times in one day, or what is it?
3 times in one day.
Okay, so the guy cannot wait 1 day?
No, that's exactly what we're saying. Very, very good. I'm happy now we got clear. In other words, by the thinning of the vines, the owner can wait. He can thin it today, he can thin it tomorrow.
Right.
No, with Aniyim had opportunity. When it comes, I think it has a lot to do with rains, Kevan. Even though you still need the galgal, the well was empty. No, it's raining now, and now if I don't do it now, I don't know if I'll be able to do it tomorrow.
Got it.
And as the Gemara fears is for hard, I've made Amarei Migalgalin. In other words, even in the case where there isn't a huge loss, it's a loss that's not so big. And by the way, not big losses are easy to know what they are. Nevertheless, the Rav Meir holds, like we spoke out, that Vishamin, let's go with the girsa, libalabayis behefseidoi. You cannot damage ani. Now, you can take, the owner is not going to lose money. The owner has the right to say, I did not irrigate the field. Because of it, next harvest, I'm going to lose my $50 or my $5,000. It's not whatever. I know what the number is. The balabas, will have the right to take it from the leket. That, no one is losing money. But Rabbanan hold that it's his field. He will know how much damage he's causing. The owner has the right to say, I'll compensate them, but I want to irrigate my field. That's the Gemara making it clear that our Mishnah is not speaking about loss of money. Even when there's no loss of money, just to close it up, do I have the right to damage your property and to pay you? That's what we're talking about. No, I don't. Even though I'm going to pay you. That's the topic. Like Geneva, not Gezeil. Now, this is really great. The next few lines, guys, before the Mishnah, according to many, actually is referring already to the next Mishnah. However, we can also understand it that, at least in the beginning, that it's in reference to our topic. So really, we're going to read it inside after we read the Mishnah. We're going to read the Marafuld inside. But let me just give you a quick heads up just to see how it can go both ways. The next Mishnah is speaking about a person who's halachically an usher. Usher means not an ani. Just to make it clear, nowadays, there's an ani, and then there's most of the people. Then there's the usher, right? Giraffe rich. We're talking about either you're an ani or an usher. You're a cutter or a god, right? There's no nados over here. The katnus labagus. So a guy is not an ani. He's traveling. In those days when you traveled, there was nothing. There's no communication. There's no bank cards. There's no credit cards. There's garnish. You ran out of food. You ran out of money. Right now, you're an ani. L'kula alma, this guy can take from other people's fields like a chikampeya. No debate about it. The question is, do we view it as a gift? And then when you come back home, you don't have to compensate to the aniyim. It's like if an ani picked up matnas aniyim, and then next year he becomes wealthy. He doesn't have to retroactively say, "Ooh, all these years I lived off the." No, now he's an usher. Or do we say he had the right to take it, but God gave him that right only as a loan, and now he has to compensate? And this concept that he has to that has to pay back Yishalem is the words of Rabbi Eliezer, and on that perhaps the Gemara is asking, okay, let's go to Rabbi Eliezer. He has to pay back. To whom does he pay back? Now, let me clarify the question, guys. Let's say the person was in New York when he ran out of his funds. So we took it from fields in New York. This guy lives in LA. Let Rabbi Eliezer that he has to pay back. Does he pay back to the aniyim of LA or to the aniyim in New York? That is this question if it refers to the next Mishnah, which means it's wrong. But let's now try to learn this in our Mishnah. The Chachamim hold that the owner has the right to irrigate his field and he's going to ruin the leket. Now the question is, to which ani does he pay? The two options would be different. To any ani of his choice, or no. Just like the leket was not something that he had the right to give it to the ani of his choice. Leket you have to leave on the field. So now the money has to be like the leket. Now, no one is going to say you leave it on the field. Make it clear. There's going to be a stampede on your field. Actually, practically, who has access? Theoretically, who has access to my leket? Any ani in the world. Practically, who has access? The aniyim of that city. Aniyim don't travel from one city to the other because every city has its own aniyim. Right? The Mishulachim are different. Mishulachim, they come from the whole world. That's different. But aniyim, to pick up leket, so Lemim Mashallah means, does the owner have the right to give it to the ani of his choice? Or do you have to give it equally to the aniyim of your city? And on that, Amar Rab Yoina l'aniya oisoi. Okay. The next line is going to go on the understanding that this Lemihu Mishalim goes on the next Mishnah, which is out of order. So let's go back to the next. Let's go back to the future. What's the next Mishnah? When you're traveling, you ran out of money and food. You can pick up the like a shikhopeya. Rabbi Eliezer holds only mitzad alone. You have to give back. So the Gemara says, and on that, to whom does he have to give it? La'aniya oisa ha'ir. So the Gemara says, the loichein man nan amen, and if not for Rav Yoina, to whom else would you think you have to give it to? In other words, we're rejecting the possibility that you will have to go back to that city and give it over there. That makes absolutely no sense. Why it doesn't make sense, we can speak about it in a moment. But that's out of the question. So why do I even need Rabbi Yoina if Rabbi Eliezer in the next Mishnah says that you can take like it, but you're like a borrower and you have to compensate? Of course, you have to go travel back. It doesn't make sense. You give it to the aniyim. You give it to the local aniyim. So the Gemara clarifies, what Rabbi Yoina meant to say was not that you might have thought you have to go back and give it over there in New York. No, he meant to say something else. That when you read the next Mishnah, which we didn't read yet, maybe Rabbi Eliezer, who says you have to give it back, maybe that was Lifnim Yishuras Hadin. That is what Rabbi Yoina wants to clarify. Maybe he's saying, listen, at the end of the day, the guy was not poor. He didn't have money. Yeah, he can keep it. But come on, give it back. Rabbi Yoina is not emphasizing that la'aniya oisa ha'ir and not to the aniyim of the city where you took it. That was not his chiddush. His chiddush is to make it clear that Rabbi Eliezer's shita is not a lifnim mishuras hadin, but it's din. He holds that if you are not an ani, it's just that you don't have access to your funds, you're not an ani. But leket was also gifted to you by God as a loan. A loan you have to repay. In other words, you're mechuyev to pay lemidas hadin nitzrecham. And now, let's look inside the Marafulda and see how it's even shaykh to even learn the last few lines on our topic, which is the way we have it in our girsa. We're in the middle of the narrow lines, right? The divrei hamaschil, v'harav meir amar v'chulei, v'harav banon amri, and that lemihu mishalem. So it says the Marafulda nira the ikra kushya lemihu mishalem is going on Milsa the Rabbi Eliezer. It's not on this topic. It's already on the next sugya. B'masnis and asmucha. Elo the hashas kavakan. The reason why it's not a mistaken girsa. Rabbi Yochanan put it over here because lefi sha'af lerabbanan yiksha okash. Our topic is you irrigated the field, but you have to compensate. And on that we can also ask lemihu mishalim. So it's the first question, even though in the yeshiva it was primarily asked on the next Mishnah. It's shaykh on this. So Rabbi Yochanan Dafka put it here. Now let's keep on reading. The Chaim Perush Adashal kan that mishalim liyahir. That what? You see, it flows. Rav Meir, the first line under the Gemara. Yeah, that's the way it is. Also, Shapar the Shmuel Bayis, Hefseidoi, V'yikach men aleket Hefseidoi. The Rav Meir Shita, all the way to the end is simple. Rav Meir says the owner has to restrict himself. He cannot irrigate his field. If he won't irrigate his field, next harvest he'll have less. The balabas will have the right to say how much. $50 loss, he'll take it from the leket. It's from what leket? From the leket on the field. In other words, if you're getting the money, if you're receiving the money from the leket on your field. There's nothing to talk about. Avol et Abanan, 3 lines under the Gemara in the Marafulda, that the owner irrigates his field, but he has to compensate. The Gemara can ask Lania ha'ir or l'chol ani she'yirtza. Now he gets to pick which one. Okay, let's leave it like that.
Rabbi, sorry, Rabbi. If there's a guy who's poor and the next day he wins the lotto, does he have to pay the leket back?
For sure not.
Okay.
See, that's the point.
Guy who's traveling is the guy who's traveling in the same position. That's
the next Mishnah.
And don't we always say anyone is like a minute from becoming poor? What is that expression?
I would say that everyone is a minute before becoming rich, Kevin. That's a big difference between me and you. I'm just kidding. I don't know.
but he's, and also the shame. There's a shame of picking up leket, isn't there? For this wealthy guy, isn't he making payment by?
Kevin, you're talking to a fundraiser. I lost my shame. I don't know what you're talking about. You're right. Point. What should he do? Okay, 1 second. I just want to read Lemidas Hadin Nitzrecha. Guys, look down the second to last Marafulda, because one thing, it's even though the Lemihu Mishalem goes both directions, the end of the sugya goes on Rabbi Eliezer, goes for the future. Lemidas Hadin Nitzrecha, such a thing you don't find in the Babli ever. It's like a puzzle. They put words in, and you can read it backwards, you can read it forwards. That Hakamashmalan did Rabbi Eliezer Mechayiv L'Shalom Min Hadin V'lo Lemidas HaChasidus. That was what Rabbi Yoina really meant to emphasize. The ilmes hachasidis. But how did Rabbi Yoina say it by saying the words lania oiso ha'ir? How do you get it out of his words? He says very good. If Rabbi Eliezer were hold that lifnim mishuras hadin you have to pay money, then Rabbi Eliezer would not have insisted. Rabbi Yoina wouldn't have said that Rabbi Eliezer says you have to give it to the niyam of that city. Whenever you're doing something lifnim mishuras hadin, you should at least have the option to give it to which any ani you want. Gavaldik. The fact that Rabbi Yoina says Lania Oiso Ha'ir, that's Rabbi Yoina's way of saying it's not Lefnim Mishuras Hadin. Lefnim Mishuras Hadin, Yachalit Mechalana She'yirtza. Now, Gaval. Okay. Now let's move on to the next Mishnah that we already learned by heart, at least the first topic of the Mishnah. So here we go. And during his travel, out of money, out of food. But don't forget, we are even including Maiserani. So, L'kula alma, no one is debating that Yitoil, he's allowed to take it. No one has a question of that. It's when God told us to leave it to the poor, really it's not just a gift to the poor. It can even maybe mean a loan to the people who need it now. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, for him it's only a loan. And therefore, when he comes back home, Yishalem. And as we just learned in the Gemara above, midas hadin, he's mechuyev, and once he's mechuyev, obviously it is la'aniya oisohi. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. However, the Chachamim hold ani hoya ba'oisa sha'am. It's a give. Why? Because at this moment he's an ani. Let me say, Kevin, what you meant to say in my way, the opposite direction. If you don't subscribe to the Chachamim, then there'll never be an ani. How can there ever be an ani? Imagine a guy comes and he says, "I need help." He says, "No, you'll be. That's you're here to help. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. It was good. Yeah, I know. I also went through that. I remember that. You'll be fine. And therefore, I don't help you." That's a very common thing we get on the Aiden project. "Oh, Rabbi Zajac, you'll be fine. You'll be great. Oh, you'll do it. I know you'll do it."
Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi, can you please clarify one thing? If you hold that it's a loan, like Rabbi Eliezer, why does that mean necessarily that you can pay back in your own city? What's the connection there?
No. There's two steps, Danny. 2 steps. First of all, if it's a loan, then you're chayiv to pay back. Once you're chayiv to pay back, then you're chayiv to pay it back. If you would not be chayiv to pay back, Danny, if Rabbi Eliezer would only be lefnim b'shuras hadin, then you would have the right to choose to any ani you want. It can be to one ani of your city. It can be to one ani from over there. It can be to anywhere you want.
Oyser ir means back where you took the money.
No. Oyser is where you live, but you have to leave it to all of the aniyim, and you don't get to pick from your city which ani you're going to give it to.
Oh, got it. But does anybody hold that you would have to go back to the original city where you took the?
No.
Okay.
Now you don't have to do. Now comes the next rule in the Mishnah, and we spoke it out in the intro, and we have enough time. Let's go back. We're not going to give the source we already gave from Chulin when we in the Hagdama, but let's go to Hamachlif. Hamachlif means like this: the ani picked up the leket. Guys, leket has an inherent exemption of a maisis. For whatever reason, the ani and the balabas are exchanging their product. For whatever reason, let's say there was leket, the barley. The owner only has wheat. Each one wants the other, and they exchange. The Mishnah wants to point out that even though they exchanged, only that which was originally leket will always remain exempt from maisis, and whatever was originally tevel will always be chayv in maisis once you come to the meiruach. And we don't say that since they flipped, so to say, the kedusha, the exemptions from one went on the other. That does not flip. So bishaloi potter, bishalaniyim chayev. Very good.
The monster is always on the product, not on the person.
Very good. That's another way of wording it. In other words, now that the aniyim have their tevo, now the aniyim have to give it, and they can't say God gave me the exemption. Very good. It's on the product and not on the person. Now, final case of the Mishnah is the din that we spoke about, David, that an ani may not collect leket shik chopeya from his own field. An ani may never receive meiser ani given from his own field. Now, from his own field, what's his own field? Now, an owner is clear. That's an owner. And by the way, you can have an owner that's an ani. Some countries, when you buy a house, you become an ani. So, his landowner is an ani. But now, I'm just kidding. Now, let's speak about a sharecropper. So, there's 2 types of sharecroppers. The normal sharecropper is someone who has a certain type of partnership in the land. The fact that for this season, when they work, they're going to get a half, they're going to get a third, they're going to get a fourth. We view them as someone that has an interest in the field. So if a sharecropper is an ani, he may not take the leket shikhopeya from that field. Not only that, what happens if a field has 2 sharecroppers? Now, if every sharecropper was given a designated part of the field, if both sharecroppers are aniyim, then this guy can take from that side can take from this side. Or if they're giving matnas aniyim, they can give it to each other. But that's not the case of the Mishnah. The case of the Mishnah was not that each others had a specific designated part of the field. A guy he hired 2 sharecroppers that both of them should work the whole field. So both of them are owners in the whole field. So says the Mishnah, Shaim Shekid Musar Isus. When 2 people received it, Zen noisen lo ze chelkoi masenani. The zen noisen lo ze chelkoi masenani. The Mishnah is differentiating between leket shikhampeya, leket shikhampeya. They may not take one from the other. They may not take one from the other. Masha'enkin ma'aserani. When do you give ma'aserani? Leket shikhampeya is when you harvest the field. They own the field. Ma'aserani is given after they receive their portion. Everyone received their portion. At some point, each one did the meruach. Now each one is chayv to give ma'aserani. Now they're now what's yours is yours, what's mine, it's mine. So ma'aserani one could give to the other. They may not give to each other if they did not have designated areas because they were both owners and everything. And even in the arisus, I know we're getting late. Now let's go. We'll stop over here. Why should I feel bad? Rabbi Blau is rushing. 7:01. And